Who was Jesus, really? Was he a revolutionary teacher, a divine being, or simply a man whose legacy was shaped by history and myth? Today we go beyond the myths and uncover the real Jesus, separating fact from fiction to gain a deeper understanding of his life and teachings. Throughout history, great figures often become legends. Their real lives get entangled with stories that amplify their deeds. Jesus is no exception. From the earliest accounts, his story was shaped by cultural narratives, political agendas, and the human tendency to mythologize figures who inspire devotion. Understanding Jesus means looking at the world he lived in, a Roman-occupied Judea in the 1st century. The region was a melting pot of Jewish traditions, Hellenistic influences, and Roman governance. Political and religious tensions ran high, with different Jewish sects vying for influence. The Sadducees controlled the temple, the Pharisees emphasized the law, the Zealots pushed for violent resistance, and the Essenes sought a more ascetic, withdrawn life. Against this backdrop, Jesus emerged as a radical teacher, challenging the status quo. As his influence grew, so did the efforts to shape his narrative. His followers spread his teachings far and wide, interpreting his message in ways that aligned with their cultural and spiritual contexts. Early Christians saw in him a fulfillment of Jewish prophecy, while others outside the Jewish tradition reinterpreted his teachings through a Hellenistic lens. This transformation over centuries gave rise to the vast diversity of Christian beliefs that exist today. Many accept the life of Jesus through blind faith, but failing to critically examine historical sources can lead to misconceptions. Faith, while a powerful force, should not discourage curiosity and investigation. True understanding comes from a willingness to explore beyond dogma, question long-held assumptions, and seek truth with an open heart and mind. The Bible itself presents varied perspectives on Jesus. The four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each portray him differently. Mark presents him as a suffering servant, Matthew emphasizes his role as the Jewish Messiah, Luke highlights his compassion for the marginalized, and John depicts him as the divine Logos, the Word made flesh. These differences are not contradictions but reflections of the theological intentions of each writer. The development of Christian theology over centuries further complicated the interpretation of Jesus. The early church debated his nature, his relationship to God, and the implications of his death and resurrection. Councils and theological arguments shaped Christianity into what we know today, but those early debates reveal how complex and multifaceted Jesus' identity was to those who followed him. The Gospels were written decades after Jesus' life. They are not eyewitness accounts but theological narratives with specific purposes. Mark, the earliest Gospel, was likely written around 70 CE, while John, the latest, may have been composed near the end of the 1st century. Each Gospel was influenced by oral traditions, evolving theological perspectives, and the needs of their respective communities. Reconstructing the historical Jesus requires sifting through fragmented evidence, cross-referencing sources, and understanding the cultural lens through which these texts were written. The Q source, a hypothetical collection of Jesus' sayings, is believed to have influenced Matthew and Luke. Other non-canonical texts, like the Gospel of Thomas, provide additional insight into early Christian thought. The influence of political and religious leaders on these texts also played a significant role. The Gospels were written not in a vacuum, but in a world where competing religious ideas and sectarian conflicts shaped the narrative. Roman persecution of early Christians, Jewish expectations of a messianic figure, and the need to distinguish Christianity from other religions all influenced how Jesus was portrayed. Translation complexities further challenge our interpretation, as meanings can shift over time. The Bible has been translated from Aramaic to Greek, from Greek to Latin, and from Latin to modern languages. Each transition carries the risk of altering nuances in meaning. For instance, the Greek word metanoia is often translated as repentance, but its deeper meaning is a transformative change of mind. Similarly, Jesus' phrase, "The kingdom of heaven is within you," Luke 17 verse 21, can be interpreted as an internal spiritual awakening rather than a physical place. Many theological concepts have been shaped by the limitations of language. The idea of original sin, for example, evolved through centuries of interpretation and translation, affecting how different Christian groups understand humanity's relationship with God. Such nuances highlight the need for a careful and historically informed approach to understanding Jesus' words. Many stories portray Jesus as a miracle worker. But were these literal events or symbolic narratives conveying deeper truths? Some scholars suggest that these miracles, whether healings, exorcisms, or control over nature, were intended to demonstrate spiritual authority rather than supernatural power. For example, Jesus feeding the 5,000 could be read not as a supernatural event, but as a lesson in sharing and abundance. Walking on water might symbolize faith overcoming fear rather than a physical defiance of nature. The resurrection itself is subject to various interpretations. Some see it as a literal event, while others view it as a metaphor for spiritual renewal and transformation. The interpretation of miracles also varies across different cultures and religious traditions. Some emphasize the supernatural as an essential part of faith, while others focus on the ethical and philosophical implications of Jesus' actions. This diversity of thought reflects the profound impact of his life and teachings across history. The kingdom of heaven, was Jesus speaking of an actual place, or was it a radical call to change our world? Many of Jesus' teachings suggest that the kingdom was not a distant paradise but a new way of living based on love, justice, and humility. His parables, such as the Good Samaritan and the Prodigal Son, emphasize radical inclusion, forgiveness, and social transformation. Jesus' message was revolutionary because it challenged power structures, advocated for the poor, and called for an inward transformation of the heart. Beyond personal transformation, Jesus' vision of the kingdom of heaven has inspired social and political movements throughout history. The idea of justice, equality, and compassion has fueled reformers, abolitionists, and revolutionaries who saw in his words a call to action against oppression and injustice. And what about Jesus himself? Was he purely divine, purely human, or something in between? The debate has lasted for centuries. The early church wrestled with this question, leading to theological disputes that shaped Christian doctrine. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE affirmed the belief in Jesus as both fully divine and fully human, but alternative perspectives existed. The Ebionites saw him as a human prophet, while the Gnostics viewed him as a spiritual being who only appeared human. Even today, different Christian denominations emphasize different aspects of his nature. Regardless of interpretation, Jesus' teachings have left an undeniable mark on history, influencing faith, politics, and culture. Christianity became a global movement, shaping art, literature, law, and morality. Figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and Mahatma Gandhi drew inspiration from his words, demonstrating the lasting power of his message. The Sermon on the Mount, with its call for peace, humility, and love, continues to inspire activists and spiritual seekers alike. The core values of Jesus, love, compassion, justice, remain relevant in today's world. His emphasis on helping the poor, forgiving enemies, and seeking truth resonates across cultures and religions. True faith is not about having all the answers but about seeking, questioning, and growing. The journey to understand Jesus is an ongoing one, open to scholars, believers, and skeptics alike. In the end, his message transcends time, inviting us all to reflect, learn, and transform. Thank you for joining this journey to uncover the real Jesus. If this video gave you a fresh perspective, like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep seeking the truth.